They say the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a knife. It's the tears of a woman who's finally stopped crying. In the towers of Manhattan, where fortunes are built on lies and marriages are traded like stock options. Some secrets are worth killing for, others are worth dying for. She had been the perfect wife, grateful, silent, invisible. But every empire built on betrayal has a foundation, and foundations can crack. Tonight, 500 of New York's most powerful people would gather for charity. They would drink champagne. They would write checks. They would witness the destruction of a man who forgot one crucial rule. Never mock a woman's tears, unless you're prepared for the storm that follows. The golden autumn light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, casting long shadows across marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. Isabella Rodriguez Wellington stood by the window, her hand gently caressing her 7-month pregnant belly, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a kingdom she thought she belonged to. At 28, Isabella possessed the kind of beauty that turned heads on Fifth Avenue. Her warm brown skin glowed with pregnancy. Her long black hair cascaded in waves down her back, and her dark eyes held an intelligence that had once captivated Marcus Wellington III. She had been a rising star in architecture before marriage, designing sustainable buildings that merged her Mexican heritage with modern innovation. Now she spent her days in this golden cage, surrounded by Italian furniture and Swiss watches, feeling more isolated than she ever had in her modest childhood home in Queens. The penthouse itself was a monument to excess 30 floors above the bustling streets, with panoramic views of Central Park, adorned with artwork that belonged in museums and furniture handcrafted by European artisans. The white Steinway piano in the corner had been a wedding gift from Marcus's father. Though Isabella had never learned to play, it sat there like everything else in her life, beautiful, expensive, and utterly useless. Marcus Wellington III entered the room with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his 45 years of existence. Tall and imposing, his salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his Armani suit tailored to perfection. He carried himself with the arrogance that came from inherited wealth. His great-grandfather had built Wellington Holdings from nothing, and Marcus wore that legacy like armor. "Isabella, darling," he said, not bothering to look up from his phone. "I need you to be particularly charming at the charity gala next week. The Astors will be there, and I'm closing a deal with Patterson Holdings." Isabella turned from the window, noting how he spoke to her like she was another business asset to be managed. "Of course, Marcus, though I was hoping we could discuss the nursery plans." "Not now," he cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Vivian is coming over to discuss the gala arrangements. She has exquisite taste in these matters." At the mention of Vivian Blackwood, Isabella felt that familiar knot in her stomach tighten. Vivian was Marcus's so-called brand consultant, a stunning blonde with ice blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. She had appeared in their lives 6 months ago, supposedly to help rebrand Wellington Holdings. But Isabella noticed how Marcus's eyes lingered on her, how their meetings always ran late, how he came home smelling of her perfume. "Marcus," Isabella began carefully, "don't you think it's strange that Vivian works such long hours? Sometimes you don't come home until—" "For God's sake, Isabella!" Marcus snapped, finally looking at her with undisguised irritation. "Your pregnancy hormones are making you paranoid. Vivian is a professional. Unlike some people, she understands the demands of running a multi-billion-dollar empire." The words stung because they carried the implicit message Isabella had heard variations of throughout their 3-year marriage. She wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't worthy of the Wellington name, wasn't the kind of woman Marcus should have married. She was the architect from Queens with Mexican immigrant parents, the scholarship girl who had caught the eye of Manhattan royalty through sheer chance at a gallery opening. As if summoned by their conversation, the doorbell rang. Elena Martinez, their housekeeper and the only person in the penthouse who treated Isabella with genuine warmth, appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Wellington? Ms. Blackwood is here," Elena announced, her weathered face showing a flicker of concern as she glanced at Isabella. Elena was 55, a woman who had worked for the Wellington family for 20 years. She had watched Marcus grow from a spoiled teenager into an entitled adult, and she had witnessed the slow erosion of Isabella's confidence over the past 3 years. Elena spoke Spanish with Isabella when Marcus wasn't around, sharing stories of her own children and treating her like the daughter she never had. Vivian Blackwood swept into the room like she owned it, her platinum blonde hair caught in an artful updo, her designer dress clinging to her model-thin frame. Everything about her screamed expensive, from her Louboutin heels to her Cartier watch, to the way she air-kissed Marcus's cheeks while completely ignoring Isabella's presence. "Marcus, darling," Vivian purred, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent Isabella could never quite place. "I have the most exciting ideas for the gala. We need to discuss the seating arrangements. I've managed to secure the table next to the mayor." Isabella watched the interaction with growing unease. The way Vivian's hand lingered on Marcus's arm, the way she leaned in just a little too close when showing him papers on her tablet, the way Marcus's demeanor completely changed in her presence, becoming animated and engaged in a way he never was with his pregnant wife. "Isabella, perhaps you should rest," Marcus suggested, not looking at her. "These business discussions might be too taxing in your condition." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. Isabella felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "I think I'll stay. After all, as your wife, I should understand." "Actually," Vivian interrupted with that sharp smile, "what we're discussing is quite complex. Marketing strategies, financial projections, things that require a certain level of expertise." The implication hung in the air like poison. Isabella's degrees from Columbia, her architectural awards, her business acumen, none of it mattered in Vivian's eyes. She was just the pregnant wife who needed to stay out of the way while the adults talked. Isabella excused herself, walking slowly to their bedroom with as much dignity as she could muster. But instead of resting, she found herself pacing, her maternal instincts screaming that something was deeply wrong. She had built her career on observation and attention to detail, and every detail about Vivian Blackwood felt wrong. That evening, as Isabella sat in their bedroom, applying moisturizer to her growing belly, she heard Marcus's phone buzz on his nightstand. He was in the shower, singing some off-key tune, completely relaxed in a way he rarely was anymore. The phone buzzed again, then again. Isabella's hand hovered over the device. She had never been the type of woman to go through her husband's phone. Trust had always been sacred to her. But something about the persistent buzzing, combined with months of growing suspicion, made her pick up the device. The screen showed 3 text messages from V. "Thank you for this afternoon. Your wife almost caught us looking at rings. LOL. Can't wait to get rid of the Mexican maid and finally be Mrs. Wellington. The baby is such an inconvenience. At least we know it might not even be yours." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. The phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering to the marble floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she worried about the baby. Nausea rose in her throat, not the morning sickness she'd finally gotten over, but the sick realization that her marriage, her life, everything she'd believed in, was built on lies. With shaking fingers, she picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages. Months of conversations unfolded before her eyes, intimate messages, plans for romantic getaways, discussions about their future together, and worst of all, cruel jokes about Isabella. They called her the obstacle, the placeholder, and other names that made her stomach turn. The shower stopped running. Isabella quickly placed the phone back exactly where it had been and pretended to be reading a book when Marcus emerged, a towel wrapped around his waist. "You look pale," he observed, though his tone suggested he couldn't care less. "The pregnancy isn't agreeing with you." Isabella looked up at this man she had loved, had trusted with her heart and her future, and felt something die inside her chest. "Marcus, can we talk about us? About the baby? About our future?" Marcus was already reaching for his phone, probably to delete those messages. "Not tonight, Isabella. I have early meetings tomorrow. Vivian has arranged for me to meet with some Japanese investors. Of course she has, Isabella whispered. Marcus didn't even hear the hurt in her voice. He was already immersed in his phone, probably texting his mistress while his pregnant wife sat 3 feet away. That night, Isabella lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept peacefully beside her, occasionally murmuring Vivian's name in his dreams. Each whisper felt like a knife to her heart. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "I promise you, little one," she whispered in Spanish, "your mama will not let them destroy us. We are stronger than they think." The next morning, Marcus left early for his business meeting with barely a goodbye. As soon as his car pulled away from the building, Isabella called Elena into the bedroom. "Elena," she said in Spanish, "I need your help with something very important." Elena took one look at Isabella's red-rimmed eyes and sat down beside her on the bed. "Tell me everything, mija." Isabella showed Elena the messages, explained her suspicions, and revealed the depth of Marcus's betrayal. Elena listened with growing anger, her weathered hands clenching into fists. "That bastard," Elena spat. "And that witch he's running around with. Mija, you cannot let them treat you like this." "I don't know what to do," Isabella admitted. "I'm 7 months pregnant. I have no money of my own, nowhere to go." "You have more power than you think," Elena interrupted. "Your father-in-law, God rest his soul, he made sure you were protected. Did you never read your marriage contract completely?" Isabella frowned. Marcus said it was just standard paperwork. Men like Marcus always lie about paperwork. "Listen to me, child. You need a lawyer, a good one, and you need to be smart about this." That afternoon, while Marcus was at his investor meeting, which Isabella now knew was probably a romantic lunch with Vivian, she received an unexpected visitor. Elena had arranged for her cousin Miguel, who worked at a law firm in downtown Manhattan, to recommend someone who could help. The man who arrived at the penthouse was not what Isabella expected. David Chen was 42, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the bearing of someone who had fought many battles and won most of them. He carried a simple leather briefcase and wore an off-the-rack suit, but there was something about his presence that commanded respect. "Mrs. Wellington," he said, accepting her offer of coffee in the living room. "Elena Martinez tells me you need legal advice. I specialize in complex family law, particularly cases involving financial fraud and domestic manipulation." Isabella found herself telling David everything: the messages, the cruel treatment, the growing isolation, and her fears about what Marcus might do once the baby was born. David listened without judgment, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "Mrs. Wellington," David said when she finished, "what your husband is doing isn't just adultery. Based on what you've told me, we're looking at potential financial fraud, emotional abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. The messages about the baby not being his could be used to challenge paternity and deny you both support and inheritance rights." "But what can I do? I signed a prenup." "Did you have independent counsel when you signed that prenup?" Isabella shook her head. "Marcus said his lawyers would handle everything." David smiled grimly. "That's the first violation. A prenup signed without independent counsel can be challenged, especially if we can prove coercion or fraud. But more importantly, if we can prove that Marcus has been hiding assets or planning to defraud you, the prenup becomes irrelevant." Hope flickered in Isabella's chest for the first time in months. "What do you need from me?" "Evidence. Lots of it. And we need to be very careful about how we gather it. If Marcus suspects you know about his affair, he might accelerate his timeline." Over the next 2 weeks, Isabella became a woman on a mission. With Elena's help, she photographed documents when Marcus was out, copied files from his computer when he left it unlocked, and even managed to hide a small recording device in his office. David had provided her with a list of what to look for: bank statements, investment records, correspondence with lawyers, and anything relating to offshore accounts. What they discovered was worse than adultery. Marcus had been systematically moving money out of their joint accounts and into offshore holdings that Vivian could access. He had taken out massive loans against properties that were supposedly in both their names. Most damning of all, they found emails between Marcus and his lawyer discussing how to legally dispose of the wife while minimizing financial exposure. The recording device captured a conversation between Marcus and Vivian that made Isabella's blood run cold. Marcus, the charity gala will be perfect. We'll announce that Isabella has been having mental health issues since the pregnancy, postpartum depression starting early, that sort of thing. Vivian. And then what, you can't just lock her away. Marcus. I don't need to lock her away permanently, just long enough to establish that she's unfit. Then I get full custody of the kid if it's even mine, and you get to be the new Mrs. Wellington. Vivian. What about the money she'll be entitled to? Marcus, what money? By the time my lawyers are done, she'll be lucky to get bus fare back to Queens. Isabella listened to this conversation in David's office, her hands protectively covering her belly. The casual cruelty in Marcus's voice, the way they discussed destroying her life like they were planning a dinner party, filled her with a rage she didn't know she possessed. We have enough, David said quietly, ejecting the recording device. More than enough. The question now is, what do you want to do? Isabella looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, thinking of all the women who had been dismissed, discarded, and destroyed by men like Marcus. She thought of her daughter or son growing up thinking this was how love was supposed to look. I want him to face the consequences, she said, her voice steady and strong. All of them, in front of everyone who matters to him. David smiled. The charity gala is in 3 days. It's going to be quite a show. The next 3 days passed in a blur of careful preparation and mounting tension. Isabella had to maintain the facade of the dutiful pregnant wife while internally preparing for war. Marcus, oblivious to the storm gathering around him, went about his days with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. You seem different, he commented over breakfast on the morning of the gala. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, not bothering to look at her as he spoke. Less weepy. The hormones must be stabilizing. Isabella sipped her orange juice and smiled serenely. I suppose I'm just learning to accept things as they are. If only he knew how true that was. The Wellington Holdings annual charity gala was the social event of the season. Held at the Plaza Hotel's Grand Ballroom, it attracted 500 of New York's most influential politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and old money families who traced their lineage back to the Mayflower. The event raised millions for various charities while simultaneously serving as a platform for the wealthy to see and be seen. Isabella spent the afternoon being pampered by a team of stylists Marcus had hired. Her dress was a custom creation by a designer who had dressed 3 first ladies a flowing black evening gown that elegantly accommodated her pregnancy while making her look like royalty. Her hair was swept into an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. Looking at herself in the mirror, Isabella barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the uncertain girl who had been intimidated by Marcus's world. In her place stood someone who looked like she belonged in this ballroom, like she was born to command attention and respect. You look beautiful, mija, Elena whispered as she helped Isabella with her wrap. Like a queen about to reclaim her throne. The ride to the plaza was tense. Marcus sat beside her in the back of their Bentley, impeccably dressed in a custom tuxedo, checking his phone constantly. Isabella knew he was texting Vivian, who would arrive separately to maintain appearances. Tonight is important, Marcus said as they pulled up to the hotel. I'm announcing the expansion into Asia, and there will be significant media attention. Try not to do anything dramatic. Isabella smiled sweetly. Of course not, darling. I wouldn't dream of causing a scene. The grand ballroom was a vision of elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls. Tables were adorned with white roses and gold accents, and a string quartet played classical music as guests arrived in their finest attire. Isabella recognized faces from magazine covers and society pages, people whose names appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. Marcus immediately began working the room, introducing Isabella to business associates and potential investors with the practiced ease of a seasoned politician. Isabella played her part perfectly, charming donors and making small talk about the charities they were supporting. But her eyes constantly scanned the crowd, looking for David, who had promised to be there. Vivian arrived fashionably late, stunning in a red dress that hugged every curve and drew appreciative glances from men throughout the ballroom. She moved through the crowd like a shark through water, graceful and predatory. When she reached Marcus, she air-kissed his cheeks while shooting a triumphant glance at Isabella. "Isabella, darling," Vivian purred. "You look substantial. Pregnancy suits you." The backhanded compliment was delivered with such sweetness that anyone overhearing would think it was genuine. But Isabella caught the malice beneath the words, the way Vivian's eyes glittered with anticipation. "Thank you, Vivian," Isabella replied evenly. "You look lovely, too. Red is such a bold choice for a charity event." The brief exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Mayor Patricia Whitman and her husband, along with several city council members. Marcus immediately shifted into politician mode, discussing tax incentives and development projects while Isabella found herself momentarily forgotten. She used this opportunity to slip away from the group, ostensibly to visit the ladies' room but actually to meet David, who had positioned himself near the back of the ballroom. He looked different in his rented tuxedo, but his eyes held the same determined intensity that had given Isabella hope over the past few weeks. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly as they pretended to admire a silent auction display. Isabella touched her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "For my child's future, I'm ready for anything." David nodded and checked his watch. "Marcus is scheduled to give his speech in 20 minutes. That's when he'll make his announcement about your mental health issues. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Isabella thought about all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, all the times Marcus had made her feel small and worthless, all the cruel jokes she had endured. She thought about the baby growing inside her and the kind of world she wanted that child to inherit. "I'm sure." The dinner portion of the evening passed in a haze of small talk and forced smiles. Isabella sat at the head table between Marcus and the wife of a pharmaceutical CEO, making appropriate responses to conversations about vacation homes and private schools while her heart hammered against her ribs. Finally, the moment arrived. The master of ceremonies, a popular news anchor, approached the podium to introduce Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host for this evening, the chairman and CEO of Wellington Holdings, Marcus Wellington III." Applause filled the ballroom as Marcus rose from his seat, buttoning his tuxedo jacket with practiced ease. He paused to kiss Isabella's cheek, a gesture that would photograph well for the society pages, before striding confidently to the podium. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. "Your generosity continues to make a difference in the lives of countless individuals and families throughout our city." Isabella watched her husband work the crowd with the skill of a master manipulator. He was charming, eloquent, and completely convincing as he spoke about charitable giving and corporate responsibility. For a moment, she almost remembered why she had fallen in love with him. "Tonight, I want to share some exciting news about Wellington Holdings' expansion into the Asian market," Marcus continued. "This represents a $2 billion investment that will create thousands of jobs and establish New York as the premier gateway for East-West business relations." The crowd murmured appreciatively. This was the kind of announcement that made headlines and boosted stock prices. However, Marcus's tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal. "I also want to address something that affects me deeply on a personal level." Isabella felt the room's attention shift, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. This was it, the moment Marcus would begin his character assassination. "My wife Isabella, as many of you know, is expecting our first child," Marcus said, gesturing toward her table. "Pregnancy is a beautiful thing, but it can also be challenging. Isabella has been struggling with her emotional health lately." Isabella sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure, even as her husband prepared to destroy her reputation in front of 500 influential people. "She's been having episodes," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone of manufactured concern. "Crying spells, paranoid delusions, accusations about imaginary affairs. The doctors say it's not uncommon pregnancy can affect a woman's mental stability." Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Isabella could feel eyes turning toward her, some filled with pity, others with uncomfortable curiosity. This was Marcus's masterstroke, painting himself as the long-suffering husband of an unstable wife. "I share this with you because mental health shouldn't be stigmatized," Marcus said. "Isabella needs help, and I intend to make sure she gets it, even if it means making difficult decisions about our future." The implication was clear. He was preparing to have her committed, to take custody of their child, to paint himself as the victim in their marriage's dissolution. In fact, just this week, Isabella's paranoid delusions led her to accuse me of having an affair with my business associate, Vivian Blackwood. Marcus gestured toward Vivian, who managed to look appropriately embarrassed by the attention. "The poor woman was merely helping me plan tonight's event." Isabella felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Marcus wasn't just destroying her, he was humiliating her in front of everyone who mattered in their social circle. But as she watched him bask in the sympathetic attention of the crowd, she remembered David's words. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone destroy themselves with their own arrogance. Those tears of hers, Marcus continued with what he probably thought was a tender smile. They come so easily now, over nothing. The doctors say it's quite common in cases like hers. He was mocking her tears, in front of 500 people, at a charity gala. Marcus Wellington III was publicly mocking his pregnant wife's emotional pain. That was the moment Isabella knew she felt nothing for him anymore. Not love, not hurt, not even anger. Just cold, crystalline clarity about what needed to happen next. Marcus was building toward his grand finale, the announcement that would position him as the noble husband, sacrificing for his unstable wife's well-being, when a commotion near the back of the ballroom interrupted him. David Chen was walking toward the stage, his lawyer's briefcase in one hand and a wireless microphone in the other. Behind him, two men in dark suits followed federal agents. Isabella realized with satisfaction. "Excuse me." David's voice carried clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have some information that this audience needs to hear." Marcus looked genuinely confused for the first time all evening. "Sir, this is a private event." "My name is David Chen," David announced, reaching the stage. "I'm an attorney representing Mrs. Isabella Wellington, and I have evidence that directly contradicts everything Mr. Wellington just told you." The ballroom fell silent except for the soft clink of champagne glasses being set down on tables. 500 of New York's most powerful people turned their attention to the lawyer who had just crashed their party. Isabella felt her heart racing, but not with fear, with anticipation. This was the moment everything would change. The silence in the grand ballroom was deafening. 500 guests sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. The string quartet had stopped playing. Even the waitstaff stood motionless, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus Wellington III stood at the podium, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and the first flicker of genuine fear Isabella had ever seen in his eyes. "Security," Marcus barked into his microphone. "Remove this man immediately." But David Chen was already at the podium, his own microphone active, his briefcase open on the podium's surface. "Mr. Wellington, I wouldn't recommend that. What I'm about to reveal is a matter of public interest involving charity fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy." The magic words. In a room full of people whose own financial dealings required careful navigation of legal boundaries, allegations of fraud and tax evasion commanded absolute attention. Marcus tried to regain control. "This is obviously some kind of shakedown attempt." "Is it?" David interrupted, pulling a tablet from his briefcase. "Let's start with some text messages." The ballroom's large screens, which had been displaying the charity's promotional materials, suddenly filled with enlarged images of text conversations. Isabella's heart pounded as she recognized the messages she had found on Marcus's phone. From V, can't wait to get rid of the Mexican maid and finally be Mrs. Wellington. From Marcus. After tonight's announcement, everyone will think she's crazy. Then we can have her committed. From V, the baby is such an inconvenience. At least we know it might not even be yours. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Isabella heard someone at a nearby table whisper, "Oh my God." The messages continued scrolling, each one more damning than the last, revealing the calculated cruelty of Marcus's plan. Vivian, who had been standing near the head table looking glamorous and confident, now appeared as if she might faint. Her face had gone white, her red dress suddenly seeming garish under the ballroom's lights. "These messages," David announced, "were sent between Mr. Wellington and Ms. Vivian Blackwood over the past 8 months. They detail a conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Wellington of her inheritance, gain custody of her child through false claims of mental illness, and transfer millions of dollars in charity funds to offshore accounts." Marcus lunged for David's microphone. "This is fabricated digital manipulation. Anyone can fake text messages." "You're absolutely right," David agreed calmly, stepping away from Marcus's grasp, "which is why I also have audio recordings." The ballroom sound system crackled to life with crystal clear audio of Marcus and Vivian's conversation from just 3 days earlier. Marcus's voice, "The charity gala will be perfect. We'll announce that Isabella has been having mental health issues since the pregnancy." Vivian's voice, "And then what? You can't just lock her away." Marcus's voice, "I don't need to lock her away permanently. Just long enough to establish that she's unfit. Then I get full custody of the kid if it's even mine, and you get to be the new Mrs. Wellington." The recording continued, laying out their entire plan in Marcus's own words. Isabella watched as faces throughout the ballroom registered shock, disgust, and recognition of the evil they were witnessing. Mayor Whitman looked horrified. The pharmaceutical CEO's wife covered her mouth with her hands. Society matrons who had known Marcus since childhood stared at him with undisguised revulsion. "Stop this," Marcus shouted, abandoning the podium and striding toward David. "This is private property. I'll have you arrested." Actually, one of the federal agents spoke up, stepping forward. "We're the ones making arrests tonight." Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI held up her badge for the room to see. "Mr. Wellington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering through charitable organizations." But David wasn't finished. "There's more," he announced. "The woman Mr. Wellington introduced as Vivian Blackwood is actually Vera Kowalski, a convicted con artist from Chicago with warrants in 3 states. Security cameras around the ballroom captured Vivian Vera as she tried to slip toward the exit, but FBI agents were already moving to intercept her. She's currently wanted for defrauding 2 other wealthy men," David continued. "Her pattern is always the same: seduce a wealthy married man, turn him against his wife, and steal as much money as possible before disappearing." Isabella rose from her seat for the first time since the chaos began. Moving slowly but with dignity, she walked toward the stage where her husband stood in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The ballroom fell silent again as all eyes turned to the pregnant woman in the elegant black dress. When Isabella reached the podium, David handed her the microphone. "My name is Isabella Rodriguez Wellington," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "For 3 years, I believed I was married to a good man. I excused his coldness, his cruelty, his constant attempts to make me feel worthless because I thought love meant sacrifice." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some curious, all riveted by her words. "Tonight, my husband mocked my tears in front of all of you. He called me unstable, delusional, paranoid. But you know what? He was right about one thing. I did cry. I cried because I believed his lies. I cried because I thought I deserved his treatment. I cried because I was afraid. Isabella's hand moved to her belly, where her child was safe and protected. But those were the last tears I will ever shed for Marcus Wellington, because I am not the weak, unstable woman he described. I am the daughter of immigrants who built a life from nothing. I am an architect who graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. I am a woman who spent weeks gathering evidence while pretending to be the helpless wife he wanted me to be. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. And I am the mother of the child he just publicly questioned the parentage of, Isabella continued, pulling a document from her small purse. This is a DNA test, conducted legally with court supervision. The baby I'm carrying is 9% confirmed to be Marcus Wellington's child. Marcus, still in handcuffs, tried to speak, but Isabella wasn't finished. My husband and his accomplice stole over $50 million from this charity and others. They planned to have me declared mentally incompetent to hide their crimes. They discussed my heritage with language I won't repeat in polite company. Isabella looked directly at Marcus, her dark eyes blazing with righteous fury. You mocked my tears, Marcus. You called them weakness. But those tears washed away my illusions about you. And now, everyone in this room knows exactly who you are. The room erupted. Applause began slowly, from one table, then another, until the entire ballroom was on its feet, clapping for the woman who had just exposed one of the biggest charity frauds in New York history. As FBI agents led Marcus and Vera away in handcuffs, Marcus turned back toward Isabella one last time. His face was no longer arrogant or confident. It was the face of a man whose world had just crumbled completely. Isabella, please, he called out. We can work this out. The baby. Our family. Isabella looked at him with pity rather than anger. We were never a family, Marcus. You made sure of that. The last image the ballroom's security cameras captured was of Isabella Wellington standing on the stage, surrounded by federal agents and lawyers, her hand protectively over her pregnant belly, looking every inch the queen she had always been meant to be. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Isabella's new penthouse in Tribeca, a space she had designed herself that perfectly blended contemporary elegance with warm touches of her Mexican heritage. Unlike the cold marble palace she had shared with Marcus, this home felt alive, filled with plants, colorful textiles, and the sound of her infant son's gentle breathing. Diego Alexander Wellington Chen slept peacefully in his crib, his tiny fist curled around Isabella's finger. At 3 months old, he had his mother's dark eyes and a serene temperament that seemed to absorb the peace of their new life. Isabella stood by the window, watching the city wake up below her. She wore a simple white blouse and tailored pants, professional attire, for her new role as CEO of Wellington Holdings, a position she had claimed after Marcus's conviction for fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The transformation of the company had been remarkable. Under Isabella's leadership, Wellington Holdings had become a pioneer in sustainable development, focusing on affordable housing projects in underserved communities. The charity scandal had initially devastated the company's reputation, but Isabella's transparency and commitment to real social change had restored public trust. Good morning, beautiful, David said, entering the nursery with 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper tucked under his arm. David Chen had become much more than Isabella's lawyer. Over the months of working together, their professional relationship had blossomed into something deeper. He was everything Marcus hadn't been: kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in Isabella's thoughts and dreams. How did Diego sleep? David asked, kissing Isabella's forehead and handing her a coffee. Like an angel, Isabella replied, smiling as she watched David gently stroke the baby's cheek. Diego wasn't biologically his child, but David loved him as if he were his own son. The Times wants to do a follow-up interview, David said, opening the newspaper to reveal a business section headline, From Scandal to Success, How Isabella Wellington Rebuilt an Empire. Isabella had become something of a media sensation, not as the betrayed wife seeking revenge, but as a businesswoman who had turned personal tragedy into social purpose. She had appeared on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Vanity Fair. Her book, Rising from the Ashes, A Woman's Journey from Betrayal to Empowerment, had become a bestseller. "What's the latest on Marcus?" Isabella asked, though she asked more out of curiosity than any lingering emotional investment. "He's adjusting to prison life," David replied diplomatically. His lawyer filed another appeal, but it was denied. 15 years, minimum security, but still. Marcus had received a substantial sentence after investigators uncovered the full extent of his financial crimes. The man who had once commanded respect in Manhattan's business circles was now serving time in a federal facility in Pennsylvania, sharing a cell with a convicted embezzler from Detroit. And Vera, deported back to Poland after serving her sentence. Apparently, Vivian Blackwood was just one of several false identities she's used over the years. Isabella shook her head, thinking about how close she had come to being completely destroyed by their scheme. If she hadn't found those text messages, if Elena hadn't encouraged her to fight back, if David hadn't taken her case. "No regrets?" David asked, reading her expression. Isabella looked around the nursery at the hand-painted mural depicting scenes from Mexican folklore, at the bookshelf already filled with children's books in both English and Spanish, at the rocking chair where she spent hours each day feeding Diego and telling him stories about his heritage. "None," she said firmly. "Not even about the tears." The irony wasn't lost on her. Marcus had mocked her tears, called them weakness, used them as evidence of her instability. But those tears had been the beginning of her strength. They had washed away her illusions and helped her see clearly for the first time in years. Elena appeared in the doorway, now serving as Diego's nanny and Isabella's household manager. At 60, she had more energy than people half her age and treated Diego like her own grandchild. "Mija," Elena said in Spanish, "your car is here. The board meeting starts in an hour." Isabella nodded, kissing Diego's forehead before heading to get ready. Today's board meeting was significant. They were announcing the launch of the Mujeres Fuertes Foundation, a charity focused on helping women escape abusive relationships and start their own businesses. The foundation had been Isabella's idea, born from her own experience and her desire to help other women who found themselves trapped in situations similar to what she had endured. The initial funding came from the recovered money from Marcus's fraud, which the courts had ordered returned to Isabella as restitution. As her car moved through Manhattan traffic, Isabella thought about the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she had been a virtual prisoner in a golden cage, convinced she was worthless, slowly being destroyed by a man who claimed to love her. Now, she was one of New York's most respected businesswomen. She had been named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in the philanthropy category. The mayor had appointed her to a task force on affordable housing. Universities called regularly, asking her to speak to their students about business ethics and women's empowerment. The Wellington Holdings headquarters had been transformed under Isabella's leadership. Gone were the intimidating marble surfaces and cold corporate art. In their place were spaces that felt warm and welcoming, with indoor gardens and areas specifically designed for employees to relax and recharge. "Mrs. Wellington," her assistant greeted her as she arrived at her office. "The board members are already assembled, and the Times reporter is here for the interview afterward." Isabella's corner office overlooked Central Park, the same view she had once admired from Marcus's penthouse. But this felt different, earned rather than inherited, meaningful rather than ornamental. The board meeting went smoothly. Isabella presented the foundation's mission statement and initial projects, a network of safe houses for women escaping domestic violence, microloan programs for female entrepreneurs, and legal aid services for women navigating divorce and custody battles. "This foundation will focus on practical solutions," Isabella explained to the assembled board members. "Not just charity, but tools for self-sufficiency. We want to help women rebuild their lives on their own terms." After the meeting, Isabella met with the Times reporter in her office. Janet Morrison was a veteran journalist who had covered the original scandal and had been following Isabella's transformation with interest. When you look back on that night at the gala, Janet asked, do you ever wish you had handled things differently? Isabella considered the question carefully. I wish I had acted sooner, she said finally. I wish I hadn't wasted 3 years believing I deserved to be treated poorly. But the actual confrontation, no. Marcus needed to face the consequences of his actions publicly, in front of the very people he was trying to impress. Your ex-husband has been sending letters from prison, requesting to see his son. Have you considered allowing visits? Isabella's expression hardened slightly. Diego doesn't need to be exposed to someone who publicly questioned his parentage and planned to use him as a tool in a custody battle. When Diego is old enough to make his own choices about his biological father, I'll support whatever he decides. But not before then. Some critics have suggested that your success is built on revenge rather than genuine business acumen. Let them suggest it, Isabella interrupted with a slight smile. My company's financial reports, our employee satisfaction ratings, and our community impact speak for themselves. People who want to diminish a woman's success by calling it revenge usually can't argue with her actual results. That evening, Isabella returned home to find David playing with Diego on a blanket in the living room. The baby was gurgling happily, fascinated by the colorful toys David was showing him. How was the interview? David asked, looking up as Isabella kicked off her heels. Good. Janet asked about Marcus wanting to see Diego. David's expression grew serious. What did you tell her? The truth, that Diego's welfare comes first. Always. Isabella sat down on the floor beside them, immediately drawing Diego's attention. The baby reached for her with both hands, and she lifted him into her arms. Sometimes I wonder what I would tell him about his father, she said softly, when he's old enough to ask. You'll tell him the truth, David said, that his biological father made some very bad choices, but that didn't define Diego's worth or his future, and that he has a family who loves him unconditionally. The word family made Isabella smile. 3 months earlier, David had proposed during a quiet dinner at home. The ring was a simple solitaire, elegant and understated, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Marcus had given her. But when David slipped it onto her finger, it felt right in a way her first engagement ring never had. They were planning a small wedding for the following spring, with Elena walking Isabella down the aisle and Diego serving as the most adorable ring bearer in history. I have new, David said, reaching for an envelope on the coffee table. This came today. Isabella opened the envelope to find a letter from the State Bar Association. David had been nominated for a public service award for his work on behalf of abuse victims, largely due to the high-profile success of Isabella's case. I'm proud of you, Isabella said, leaning over to kiss him. We make a good team, David replied, in court and in life. As they sat on the floor of their home, Diego babbling contentedly between them, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had once cried herself to sleep in a marble palace was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and more purposeful. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Maria Santos, a young woman Isabella was mentoring through the Mujeres Fuertes Foundation. Maria had escaped an abusive marriage with her 2 children and was now starting her own catering business with help from the foundation's microloan program. Mrs. Wellington, I just wanted to thank you again. Today I signed the lease for my restaurant space. My children will never have to see their mother be afraid again. You saved our lives. Isabella showed the message to David, who smiled and shook his head in amazement. You realize you're changing the world, don't you? He said. Isabella looked down at Diego, who was reaching for her necklace with determined baby fingers. I'm just trying to make sure his world is better than the one I grew up in. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet family moment. Elena appeared, carrying a large bouquet of flowers. These just arrived, she announced. No card, but the delivery man said they were from an admirer. Isabella frowned, taking the flowers. White roses, expensive ones, the kind Marcus used to buy for their anniversary. Her stomach turned slightly. Throw them away, she said immediately. And Elena, Please call the building's security. I want to make sure they're screening all deliveries. David was already on his phone, calling the private security firm that handled protection for Isabella and Diego. Since becoming a public figure, Isabella had received both admiration and criticism, including some disturbing messages from people who thought she had been too harsh on Marcus. It's probably nothing, David said, but we should be careful. Isabella nodded, but she wasn't really worried. The frightened woman who had once lived in fear of Marcus's moods and threats was gone. In her place was someone who had faced down her worst nightmare and emerged victorious. Later that night, after Diego was asleep and David was reviewing case files in his study, Isabella stood once again by the window looking out at the city. But instead of feeling trapped or isolated, she felt connected to the millions of stories unfolding in the lights below. Somewhere out there, other women were facing the same choices she had faced. Some would find the courage to fight back, others would need more time, and some might never escape their situations. But because of her foundation, because of her story, at least some of them would have options they wouldn't have had otherwise. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Janet Morrison from the Times. Isabella, I'm sorry to call so late, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Marcus Wellington gave an interview to a tabloid magazine. It's not flattering. Isabella felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the old fear trying to resurface. Then she remembered who she was now. What does he say? He claims you orchestrated everything to steal his fortune, that you were never really in love with him, that you planned from the beginning to destroy him. He's painting himself as the victim of a gold-digging immigrant who seduced him and then turned the system against him. Isabella was quiet for a moment, processing this latest attempt at character assassination. Janet, she said finally, do you remember the audio recording of Marcus and Vivian planning to have me committed to steal my inheritance? Of course. Then you know who the real gold digger was in that relationship? Let Marcus tell his story. The truth has a way of speaking louder than lies. After hanging up, Isabella sat down at her computer and began typing. If Marcus wanted to play the victim, she would remind the world exactly what kind of victim he was. Her blog post, published on the Wellington Holdings website at midnight, was titled On Truth Lies and the Stories We Tell Ourselves. In it, she didn't attack Marcus directly. Instead, she shared the audio recordings again, alongside court documents and financial records that told the real story of their marriage. She ended with a simple statement. I spent 3 years believing lies about myself. I won't spend another moment defending myself against them. The truth stands on its own. The blog post went viral within hours. By morning, Truth Stands Alone was trending on social media, with thousands of women sharing their own stories of overcoming gaslighting and emotional abuse. Isabella woke up to find Diego cooing happily in his crib and David bringing her coffee and a stack of messages from supporters around the world. Marcus just made you more famous, David said, scrolling through the social media responses. And not in the way he intended, Isabella laughed, a sound that would have been impossible a year earlier. He never did understand the power of truth. 6 months later, Isabella stood before a crowd of 500 women at the first annual Mujeres Fuertes conference. The audience included successful businesswomen, survivors of domestic violence, young entrepreneurs, and students, all united by their determination to create better lives for themselves and their daughters. When I was married to Marcus Wellington, Isabella said, he used to mock my tears. He saw them as weakness, as proof that I was unstable and inferior. But I learned something important. Tears are not weakness. Tears are clarity. They wash away illusions and help us see what's really there. The audience was completely silent, riveted by her words. Some of you have cried tears of frustration, of fear, of rage. Some of you are crying them right now. But those tears are not the end of your story. They are the beginning of your strength. Isabella paused, looking out at the sea of faces, women of all ages, all backgrounds, all circumstances, united by their shared determination to rise above whatever was trying to hold them down. I name this foundation Mujeres Fuertes, strong women because that's what we are. Not because we don't cry, but because we rise. Not because we don't fall, but because we get back up. Not because we don't face injustice, but because we fight back. Sacraltum. The applause was thunderous. Women throughout the audience were on their feet, many with tears streaming down their faces, tears of recognition, of hope, of shared strength. After the conference, Isabella returned home to find Diego taking his first wobbly steps between Elena and David. Her heart swelled as she watched her son's determined little face, his absolute confidence that the arms reaching for him would catch him if he fell. That night, as she tucked Diego into his crib, Isabella whispered to him in Spanish, "Mi amor, you will grow up in a world where women are strong, where truth matters, and where love doesn't require you to make yourself small." Mama made sure of that. As she turned off the light and left the nursery, Isabella caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened, isolated person who had once lived in Marcus's golden cage. This woman had laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her black hair from the stress of building an empire. Her hands bore calluses from late nights at the computer and early mornings with her son. Her back was straight with the confidence of someone who had faced her worst fear and emerged victorious. Most importantly, her eyes held something they had never held during her marriage to Marcus Peace, Isabella Rodriguez. Wellington Chen had learned that the most dangerous tears are the ones we refuse to shed, the ones that stay trapped inside, poisoning us with unspoken truth. The tears that Marcus had mocked had been her salvation, washing away years of lies and revealing the strength that had always been there, waiting for its moment to shine. She had risen from the ashes of her destroyed marriage, not seeking revenge, but seeking justice. And in finding justice, she had found herself. As Isabella settled into bed beside David, she felt Diego stirring in the next room through the baby monitor. Soon he would wake for his late-night feeding, and she would sit in the rocking chair telling him stories about his brave grandmother who had crossed an ocean for a better life, and his strong mama who had fought for his future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, board meetings and legal briefs, speaking engagements and foundation work. But tonight, Isabella Wellington was exactly where she belonged, home. Safe, surrounded by love, and free. The tears had stopped falling long ago. In their place was something far more powerful, the unshakable knowledge that she was worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And that knowledge would carry her through whatever came next. Marcus Wellington III had mocked her tears, called them weakness, used them as evidence of her inadequacy. He would spend the next decade in prison, learning too late that the woman he had underestimated was far stronger than he had ever imagined. But Isabella had moved beyond thoughts of Marcus and his consequences. She was too busy building a future where other women wouldn't have to cry alone in golden cages, where children like Diego would grow up understanding that love and respect went hand in hand, and where the truth would always, eventually, set everyone free. The millionaire had mocked his pregnant wife's tears, but those tears had washed away his lies, exposed his crimes, and revealed the woman he should have cherished all along. In the end, Isabella Rodriguez Wellington Chen had the last word, not in anger or revenge, but in the life she built from the ashes of what he had tried to destroy. And that life was beautiful beyond anything Marcus could have ever imagined.